Mississippi, where the barn is.
After kidnapping Emmett Till, it's believed J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant brought him here, to this barn in Drew, Mississippi. Drew is about 30 miles from Money in Sunflower County. That day, an 18-year-old named Willie Reed saw Emmett.
The only first time I ever saw him was when he was on the back of that truck.
In 2004, the FBI brought Willie Reed back to this barn.
You know, this is the area when the FBI showed up. This
Dentist Jeff Andrews bought the barn in 1992, and he still owns it today.
The FBI brought him here, and he said this was the location where he heard the screams. He didn't see.
You see 3 black people on the truck. You see a young one, and then you see 2 old ones, and then you see 2 white men, and they go into that barn.
I saw him motion and say, I was walking down this road right here, and he pointed at the driveway.
But when I get near that barn and hear that beating that barn out, then I know who it was.
You know, if he heard that and he was this close, I'm sure he probably didn't stick around too long. So, you know, because you see how close proximity that is. But, you know, this was the area here and that
So this is the Black Bayou Bridge on the south side of Glendora. So the belief is that the murderers left the barn in Drew with Till wrapped in a tarp, either beaten within an inch of his life or perhaps even dead. But then they brought him back to Glendora, where they obtained the cotton gin fan and then brought him to this bridge and dropped him in the river through the gap in these V-shaped girders right here.
The body of 14-year-old Emmett Till, weighed down by a gin fan, was tossed into the water. It's not clear exactly where Emmett Till's body was thrown or exactly where it was found. But 3 days after his kidnapping, Emmett Till's body was found.
It shouldn't have been found. Because they had it properly done to weight it down. But going downstream, it snagged.
Imagine being 17 years old and fishing on a beautiful day like you might do any other time in your life, and noticing 2 knees bobbing out of the Tallahatchie River. That's exactly what happened when Emmett Till's body was discovered.
Once Emmett's body was pulled out of the river, Mamie Till made 3 key decisions that cemented her son's legacy as a catalyst for the civil rights movement. First, she ordered his body back to Chicago.
I remember being with her when we stayed up all night waiting on the body to come in from Mississippi. And when it did come in, she demanded that the body be opened so the world could see what they did to my boy.
Mamie, secondly, ordered her son Emmett's casket remain open. Tens of thousands would file past it at Robert's Temple and see.
And when they opened the casket in the funeral home, I remember a piece of his skull fell off, and my photographer went over and reached over and picked it up and put it back on before he shot a picture.
And that picture, Mamie allowing that picture to be taken and then published by Jet Magazine, was her 3rd pivotal decision.
Very gruesome scene, but she was a tough lady.
It was courageous. It was very courageous. Pictures worth 1,000 words.
I mean, the world needed this shock. They needed it. I think it really let us see the ugly monster that race hatred is. It's almost as if it was embodied in his appearance and his physical appearance, because it is a monster.
She changes everything in that moment. She wants the world to see what they've done to my son.
Till's body was found in the Black Bayou. It contributed to the Tallahatchie and what's close to that. So I want to give you some proximity. If you look to the right in that photo, that's another bridge over the Tallahatchie River. That's also another site that they believe the body was thrown into the river. This is a sign that will take you down to Gravel Landing, which is where they believe his body was found. And these are pictures that I took in May. So if you look at these photos and the proximity of things, it's really interesting. Upper left, J.W. Milam's house. It's a pile of rubble now. It just fell last year, they told me. To the right is a cotton gin where J.W. Milam worked. 50 feet away from his house. Gee, I wonder how they got a cotton fan. Behind J.W. Milam's house is farmland for maybe a couple hundred yards. You know what's on the other side of the farmland? The Black Bayou River. You can stand at that location of that sign and see all of that. I never had any clue that they were next to each other. That barn is 30 miles away, mind you, but this is all right together. So this is a photo looking down the river at the Gravel Landing site. And right over here is where the Black Bayou River comes in. And so where I'm standing taking this photo is where the kid was fishing and found the feet right over here. There's the Gravel Landing sign. That is the third sign since 2017. The other ones have been shot up and destroyed. The first one was shot up within 35 days of the time it was put up. Okay, lie number 3, Glendora Cotton Mill. The Ethics Center, which is a place that we went, in the cotton mill, there's part of a museum there. That's presumably where the cotton gin fan came from and the barbed wire that was tied around his neck when he was found in the river. Mayor Johnny Thomas, who we met, owns the Ethics Center as a stepson of Henry Lee Loggins. If you remember, he's one of the murderers. And so Johnny Thomas talks about how his stepfather was one of the murderers. The Mississippi Department of Archives and History disputes all of his claims and consequently wouldn't give him any money. So he went to the U.S. Department of Agriculture that gave him $325,000 to bring broadband to a very, very poor area of the United States. He got that grant. And with that grant, he applied with it with a bid of how it was going to be used. He fired the contractor. He took it himself. He hired his family and prisoners to redo this computer lab, which is part of that facility that we visited, that is no longer in use, by the way. He used the money to then develop this museum that he claims all this stuff happened. Now, the National Archives, the Atlanta Archives don't believe it. The U.S. Department of Agriculture did it because they wanted to bring broadband. So we really don't know if that's true. Thomas pled guilty to an illegal gambling charge, so he's a convicted felon. Believe it if you wish. This is what Mose Wright's church looks like today. On the left, that's what's standing of his church. That's where the funeral for Emmett Till had occurred down there the same day his body was found. And to the right is the cemetery. And if you actually look in the distance, you can see the remnants of the church. This is where Emmett Till had a hole dug to be buried. And the little red car there actually is my car. So that was taken this summer. That's what it looks like today. Okay, you've seen that. That's from Jet Magazine. They allowed the photographer in, and by allowing the photographer in to take those photos, and the open casket is what changed everything. This is what the Sumner County Courthouse looks like today. When the Ethics Center was established across the street, not the Ethics Center, but the Till Memorial, what's the name of it? Intrepid Center, thank you. It's a museum, essentially. There's a museum down in Sumner. Then there's also another group in Chicago. They are coordinated. They have cross-board members, but they are separate entities. This group was established in 2014. They went to 2016 and said to the courthouse, we want to give tours in there. They said, absolutely not. We will not remember anything about Emmett Till. The courthouse was falling apart. They elected for the first time ever a black commissioner. The black commissioner said, we need to do something about this courthouse. And this foundation is willing to help us raise money for it. So the foundation raised $4 million and renovated the courthouse to the 1955 standards. It is a very interesting place. That is exactly the way it looked in 1955. And I can tell you from personal experience, and maybe these two have different experiences. I walked in, my legs started shaking. I had to sit down because I've seen pictures of that courthouse, of that trial. And it took me, it hit me hard. And so at that time is when they put that sign up that you may have seen in other photos. This photo down in the lower right is the jury room. It's essentially as big as the table, and the door to the jury room is right there. That's where the jury sat. That's where the witness sat. So you tell me they couldn't hear. Is there more photos? The left on the photo is from the jury box looking out. Lower right is looking from where the black reporters were required to sit, separate from the white reporters. And the upper right-hand corner is a 4x4 room where the witnesses were held. Mamie Till sat in that room for 2 days. There was no air conditioning, no fans. It was 118 degrees in that building. And she was in a tin room for a day and a half by herself. She had to bang on the door to even go to the bathroom. Okay, another video.
It began September 19th, 1955. Every defense attorney in town volunteered to represent Milam and Bryant. According to press reports, the defense fund raised $10,000, and an all-white jury was seated. For his 1963 thesis, Whitaker interviewed them all.
Everyone treated me well. Everyone was very open about it. All the lawyers, both sides, the judge, all the jurors, all gave me interviews.
And what Whitaker learned about the jury pool is eye-opening. The man in charge of picking the list of jurors was the county attorney. The county attorney at the time was John Whitten, one of Milam and Bryant's defense attorneys.
He handpicked the jury. He assured that the list from which the jury was taken had only people that he was pretty certain were totally racist and who would think nothing of killing an African American.
The Tallahatchie County District Attorney was Gerald Chatham. He requested help from the state to take on this case. Attorney and former FBI agent Robert Smith III was appointed as special prosecutor.
I'm very proud that my father took that stand. Nobody had ever really prosecuted a white person in Mississippi for killing a black person.
And Smith and Chatham had many challenges. The hand-picked jury pool they may not have known about, but they would have known they were not getting help from their own investigator, Tallahatchie Sheriff H.C. Strider. Strider was a staunch segregationist.
We never have any trouble until some of our southern niggas go up north and the NAACP talks to them and they come back home.
Sheriff Strider was also running things in the courtroom, and he demanded segregation, even among the press.
The sheriff, H.C. Strider, declared at the beginning of the trial that there would be no mixing, no race mixing, as he called it. So the white journalists were not supposed to interact with the black journalists.
But what Strider didn't know was that not only were white journalists interacting with black journalists, they were all working together to further the investigation of the case, along with the NAACP and the sheriff of Lafleur County, George Smith. It all began with a tip to Dr. T.R.M. Howard.
This guy named Frank Young. He had information that people had witnessed, African Americans had witnessed, Till being brought into equipment shed in a farm.
Dr. Howard was a well-established doctor and civil rights activist based in the all-black town of Mound Bayou, Mississippi.
And this is the day before the trial. So the trial was scheduled to occur on Monday. This occurred on Sunday. He gets NAACP people together like Medgar Evers, Amzie Moore, ultimately goes to black reporters and he says, look, we have evidence here that this had occurred. We got to go find these witnesses.
Simeon Booker and Moses Newsom were among those reporters.
Our driver was Medgar Evers, who drove us to all those back yard plantations and plains where we were trying to find witnesses back there. And we changed clothes and went out wearing something like plantation workers would usually be wearing. We did round up a couple of people who did actually testify in the case.
And that's how people like Willie Reed were discovered and brought into trial.
In the field, they come across the field while they done that.
Willie Reed was just 18 years old.
Then nobody swayed me to it, you know. But I mean, I just did the thing because I had to tell the truth because that was the truth.
Willie Reed, Mamie Till, and some members of the black press also stayed at Dr. T.R.M. Howard's compound in Mound Bayou.
So his house was here, or it was over there?
No, see where that house
Oh,
is?
where that house
That's
is.
where his house was.
It burned down mysteriously, I guess, right?
You could see
1,000 acres.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was all continuous.
back in there.
Yeah.
Nothing is left of T.R.M. Howard's Mound Bayou home today, but in 1955, it was quite the place. And for those associated with the trial, it was secure.
It was highly secure because Mound Bayou is an all-black town, and Howard had 24-hour security that he'd had for quite some time. He was heavily armed.
I didn't know anything at all about Mound Bayou. I didn't know it was an all-black town. I didn't know that the people in Mound Bayou did not tolerate any invasion of any kind.
That the Iowa House was just like you trying to get into the White House because he had his guards out there. You couldn't go through there.
Willie Reed was a surprise witness at the trial, his testimony a key link in the case.
It won't establish the time and place of the actual murder, but it will connect the defendants with the crime.
He testified to seeing Emmett in the back of a 55 Chevy truck with two black men, including one he knew, Levi Too Tight Collins.
I saw that truck when he went down, it passed me, and I saw that young boy, and I saw Too Tight Collins on that car.
Reed testified he saw four white men in the cab of the truck, and then to hearing a beating at the barn in Drew and seeing J.W. Milam with a gun.
Now, later on in the morning, did you see Mr. J.W. Milam out there?
Yes, sir.
Where did you see him?
When I passed by, he came out to the well.
And was that J.W. Milam, the man who was sitting over there?
Yes, sir.
Did you see or hear anything as you passed by the barn?
I can hear somebody hollering. And I heard some licks, like somebody was whipping somebody.
And I told him what these people did and what I saw, and I told them the truth because they did kill that boy.
He actually said he don't think he could have lived with it. He don't think he could have lived knowing that he heard all that noise and heard that child hollering and crying and don't say anything.
Willie Reed's widow says what he witnessed bothered him his entire life, that he would sometimes have night terrors, and that he always stood by his decision to testify.
One thing that really touches me is that one of the witnesses, 18-year-old Willie Reed, this guy put his life on the line. He came in and had the courage.
Mose Wright famously testified first, standing and pointing out both J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant as the men who took Emmett from his home.
So he knew by testifying he could be killed for this. But he said a man has to do what a man has to do. And he did it. He did something that no other black man had ever done in Mississippi and lived to tell about it.
It was a real climax. I suppose the first time a black has ever pointed to a white person in Mississippi, accusing him of a crime where he could be executed.
The defense's case hinged on disputing the identity of the body found in the Tallahatchie River as actually being that of Emmett Till. Mamie Till testified she saw her son's body and she had no doubt.
This is the defense team's closing argument. Every last Anglo-Saxon one of you has the courage to free these men and warn the jurors your forefathers would turn over in their graves if these boys were convicted on such evidence as this. The jury took less than an hour and came back with a guilty verdict, they would have been done in 20 minutes, except that they took a soda break. Interesting enough, what came out in 2007 is that they were not unanimous for the first two votes.
People on the other side of the river.
That's correct. Okay, one more video.
After more than 200 failed attempts to outlaw lynching, Congress is finally succeeding in taking the long overdue action by passing the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act.
Chicago Congressman Bobby Rush sponsored the legislation.
I could not have named it that mill after a more deserving example of what lynching, the horrors of lynching.
The Senate has now finally addressed one of the most shameful elements of this nation's past by making lynching a federal crime. That it took so long is a stain, a bitter stain, on America.
For the President Biden to sign the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act into law means that, America has made a statement.
There is something that has emerged that we can take some solace in, and that is that the name Emmett Till is going to live on in the context of justice. Every time somebody is brought to justice in the case of a lynching as it's defined in the law, the name Emmett Till will be spoken again.
And ultimately, Emmett Till's story will be kept alive. His life remembered. A legacy.
The verdict was unjust, but because of that verdict, Emmett's still memory and legacy is still alive.
Well, you need to get the truth out there. That's why I try to show the truth, the real truth, and somebody will believe it.
For him to have died a hero would mean more to me than for him just to have died.
Those sites are important, and they are heavy. Here in Chicago, we can learn more about Emmett Till's life, and we can celebrate the determination of his mother, who refused to let America turn away from a gross, intolerable injustice. Her bravery and strength in 1955 helped inspire and spark the civil rights movement.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 450, an act to award posthumously the Congressional Gold Medal to Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley.
Okay, so we had like I said, we had a tour guide when we went down there. And the tour guide said to me, I'm going to be in Chicago in 2 weeks. She's originally from Chicago. She moved back down there because she had family. And she asked me if I wanted to go to a presentation in Chicago. The Indianapolis Children's Museum has a traveling show alongside the Smithsonian that has traveled the United States for the last 2 years. We'll end this December in Memphis at Martin Luther King's assassination site, the museum there. And so it was going to Chicago in 2 weeks, and she was going to go up there. And she invited me. She says, it's an invitational event. I said, well, who's going to be there? And she said, the Till family. And I said, I think I might stand out. And she said, no, there's going to be 500 people there. So I got invited, and I actually went. So that day of it, I went to Chicago and saw the sites. And by the way, it referred to those sites being National Historic Sites. That actually has occurred in 2023. President Biden named 3 sites, the church in Chicago where his body was shown, the Sumner Courthouse, and the Grable Landing where his body was found are National Historic Sites as of today. And I actually talked to our tour guide the day that occurred, because that picture at the White House of the signing of the anti-lynching law, she was there. And she said that she could not make it to the declaration of these National Historic Sites, but she sent me a picture of her with her new hat, her National Parks Board hat. Yeah. So she invited me. And so I went up there and I went to these various sites, and I was going to show you some of the photos. Left is the second boyhood home of Till. That's actually where he was before he went on the train. He'd only lived there for 2 years. If you saw the movie Till that was directed by Whoopi Goldberg, the proceeds from that movie are renovating that facility to open in 2025. Mamie and her mother lived on the second floor. Other relatives lived on the first floor. That's in the south side of Chicago. Down the street, they have the Mamie Till Forgiveness Garden, where she went after Emmett died, and that's where she would cry and pray. This is the Roberts Church now. It's pretty dilapidated. That's what it looked like when people were in line. And notice the Catholic salvage group next to it. The Catholics were at the forefront of civil rights. They were in the march from Selma, and they were on the right side of history. This is Emmett Till's burial site. This is in Summit, Illinois, which used to be called Argo. And I brought a prop for Argo. You've never heard of Argo? Yes, you have. That is the corn plant in Chicago that people from the Delta went up. Hundreds of people went up there, including Mamie Till and then later her husband. So it was originally called Argo. It was changed to Summit. His gravesite is still there. Now, mind he was exhumed in 2005, but his is easy to find because it's got all these flowers around it. Other places in that cemetery are not, including the one on the lower right. That's Moe's Wright burial site. After the trial, he did not go back home because he was told that it wasn't safe for him to go back home. So he slept in the cemetery at his church. And then the next day he went to his house, got one suitcase. Now he didn't own the house, he was a sharecropper. He got one suitcase, left the family dog behind, and got on the train, went to Chicago. This is in Summit. This is Emmett Till's other boyhood home from when he was born in 1947, I believe it was, or 47, until he moved away. I think it was in 51. He briefly lived in Detroit because his mother got remarried and they moved to Detroit because her husband's from Detroit. Then they eventually moved back to that other place that I just showed you. And in 2023, they put up the statue of Mamie Till at Argo High School. And it's a really neat statue because it spokes of this circular wheel, essentially, or how far it is to all the different sites that are involved in Emmett Till. This is the display of the museum. When I went to the event, it was at the DuSable African American Museum in Chicago, across the street from the University of Chicago. There was a panel discussion in an auditorium, about 500 people, essentially the who's who of civil rights in the United States that are in the Chicago area, including Jesse Jackson's entire family was there. President Obama was invited. I sat in that room of 500 people thinking, what in the world am I doing here? And then my tour guide found me. Oh, by the way, these are the part of the museum sites. Most of these things at museums, you're not allowed to take photos of. I didn't ask. There was no prohibition. These are some more of the portions of the museum, the traveling museum. Notice the sign up there. That is the second sign that was shot up at the Riverside. The first one is in the Smithsonian in DC. And then this traveling show, after it gets done, is going to move to the Summit outside the courthouse in the Historical Center there, because it's the National Parks Board. Okay, who are those two people? Who's the other guy? It is Reverend Wheeler Parker. I talked to him twice. That is the last survivor of Emmett Till. He was in the house. And how did I ever become connected with him? It's an interesting story because I was reading his book among all these different things I've read. Came out in 2023. I was about 2/3 of the way through it. I realized that he was a pastor in Chicago, an active pastor. I looked up his church, found his email address, sent him an email. He called me. This was on New York Times bestseller list. This was published in January 23. His book is a little different than the others. His is about the closing of the FBI investigation because he was an informant to them, and they said that he cannot reveal anything he learned in there, including a memoir that was written by Carolyn Bryant to be released 10 years after her death of her part of the story, which is part of where Timothy Tyson said that she recanted things, but not in her book. She didn't. She said she was as much of a victim as he was in her book. Yeah. I sent him an email and I asked him, I said, here's something that confuses me about this whole story. I said, you talk about Simeon Wright, which is this book. You kept calling you your uncle, but you say he's younger than you. Is that true? He says, yeah, he's 4 years younger than me. And then he told me about the 20 kids and all that. And then he put me in touch with our tour guide, and that's how I got connected with her. So I'm at this event in Chicago. She sees me. She says, come here. And you could just see her doing it after meeting her. She grabbed my hand, pulled me over, says, you need to meet Reverend Wheeler Parker. And so she comes up, says, Reverend Parker, this is Pat. He says, is that the guy from Purdue? Who I talked to like 6 weeks before? I said, yeah. And he said, oh, I'm so glad to meet you. He says, what'd you see down there? And I told him I went to the barn, and I said, it took my breath away. And he said, I won't go there. I will not go there. And then I said, I've got something to show you too. And he says, what's that? And I showed him the picture of his grandfather's grave. And he put his hand on my arm and he said, oh my God, I've never been to that gravesite. I said, why? He said, well, when my grandfather died, I was sick and the family wouldn't take me. And believe me, the cemetery is not laid out very logically up there. It's hard to find things. It took me an hour in the cemetery to find it, to get the photo. And so I gave him the photo, and then I gave him the directions that I had, and I circled where it was, and I gave it to him. And he said, I might go. I told him about the seed barn. He says, I will not go there. I refuse to go there. He said, that is too hurtful. And so I would talk to him for about 20 minutes because we were around a corner, and there's literally hundreds of people. Then all of a sudden people realized where he was. And so there was a line now. And I said, you know, it's just an honor to meet you, sir. And I said, I have a favor to ask you. And he kind of looked at me really confused. He says, what's that? I said, you're a pastor. Can I pray with you? So we clasped hands. This is hard for me to say. We clasped hands, and I thank God for meeting him and for the gift that Emmett Till has given us. And he started crying. So why is this all important? Textbooks are removing civil rights history. Emmett Till is barely mentioned in U.S. history any longer. Civil rights, for some reason, has become political, not historical. Slavery has become political, not historical. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, and I'm not trying to get political, I'm just using direct quotes. Slaves developed skills in which some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. Fox News host Jesse Waters, no one is arguing slaves benefited from slavery. No one is saying that that is not true. They are teaching how Black people develop skills during slavery. In some instances, that can be applied for their own personal benefit. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Okay, this is in your handouts, and I wanted to have volunteers read those because it says, how are we to respond to what we have learned? So these are reflections that we can read. So if I could have volunteers, someone want to read the first one. Zelda.
Well, when you get to the page.
Yeah.
Right back. Oh, well, see, thank you. Okay.
Not organized. It's hard to do.
Have I fully loved God and fully loved my neighbor as myself?
Have I caused pain to others by my actions or my words that offended my brother or my sister?
Have I done enough to inform myself about the sin of racism, its roots, and its historical and contemporary manifestations? Have I opened my heart to see how unequal access to economic opportunity, jobs, housing, and education on the basis of skin color, race, or ethnicity has denied and continues to deny the equal dignity of others.
Is there a root of racism within me that blurs my vision of who my neighbor is?
Have I ever witnessed an occasion when someone fell victim to personal, institutional, systemic, or social racism, and I did or said nothing, leaving the victim to address their pain alone?
Have I ever witnessed an occasion when someone fell victim to personal, institutional, systematic, or social racism with me inflicting the pain, acting the opposite of loving God and loving neighbor?
Have I ever lifted up and aided a person who fell victim to personal, institutional, systemic, or social racism and paid a price for extending mercy to the other? How did I react? Did my faith grow? Am I willing to grow even more in faith through my actions?
Some things to reflect upon. And then I'll have a closing prayer, and then I'll have some other closing comments. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. And I ask you to join me as I read this prayer. God of heaven and earth, you created one human family and endowed each person with great dignity. Aid us, we pray, in overcoming the sin of racism. Grant us with grace in eliminating this blight from our hearts, our communities, our social and civil institutions. Fill our hearts with love for you and our neighbor, so that we may work with you in healing our land with racial justice. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in unity with the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I've got lots of books here that I've read. Like I said, the Simeon story is one that you cannot put down. Once you start it, it is so engaging in what happened. This one's a lot thicker. This is Reverend Wheeler Parker's book. It is like 500 pages, but it gives a very interesting aspect to the FBI investigation, why that was stopped. Remembering Emmett Till from Dave Tell, who was interesting in one of the videos. His is a very academic approach to it, and his is, what does this all mean, essentially? Death of Innocence, this is Mamie Till Mobley, who the co-author of that was Chris Benson, who is also in the video, and he was the co-author of this book as well. He's a professor at Northwestern. I met him and talked to him briefly up in Chicago as well. Death in the Delta, story of Emmett Till. This is more about the social impact of it. And this is just some of the dozens and dozens of books that have been read. Here are some of the other things that I picked up at different civil rights sites over the years. And so you're welcome to borrow those. If you want to borrow those, get it back to Zelda. So the last thing I'm going to leave you with is this, where I started, is who is our neighbor? And so from Luke, so which of these three do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And he said to him, he who showed mercy on him. Then Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. Okay. This is also from the USSB. We have prayed now. With changed heart, let us move our feet to action. So I'm going to open up to any kind of reaction, questions, or comments that you wish to make from what you've heard tonight. Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for sharing all of this.
Welcome.
But I just finished the Simeon's story book, and
fascinating.
Yeah, one of the things too that struck me, that the members of who were in the house that night when Emmett was abducted, the mother never slept in that house again, and the family all left. They all moved to Chicago, and I just thought, there was such trauma for all of them, and it just made me think of just the idea of trauma and what it does to a person's psyche and how it affects the rest of their life. And it's just a very humbling, like, oh my gosh, these people suffered tremendously.
In our world, we think we're gonna call 911. Mosrite went to the sheriff the next day and he said, what do you want me to do about it? That his his great nephew had been abducted. What do you want me to do about it? You're black people, you have no right. Other questions, comments, yes, ma'am?
So these black youths that were in the pit,
They were workers for Leslie Milam. Leslie Milam was the manager of the seed barn where Emmett Till was killed. And then there were some others that were workers for J.W. Milam on his farm as well. They were hired hands and they needed help to hold Emmett Till down. Well, yeah, it's like, well, you know, and when I talked to our tour guide, Sumner, Mississippi, population of 400 where the trial occurred. She said, you need to understand how racist this town still is. I said, what do you mean? He said, you see the railroad tracks to the west of the courthouse? 100% black. East side, 100% white. I said, how can that be? He said, there's a realtor, a black realtor on one side, there's a white realtor on the other, and if black comes to a white realtor, she calls somebody in town, they'll pay her 25% over the asking price that day. It is still 100% segregated. They can vote now, and she says, you have to understand that the blacks here depend on the whites for their jobs. So they're not going to raise help. Yet today.
Reagan, one of the southern racist roads.
Yep.
You went to Lincoln and
Yep.
whatever you get the from the south.
Correct.
And 1964, 65, and when he goes from the civil rights law, he's the biggest law that's all the south.
That's correct.
And so when they was first did outdoor route, he went through their intervention. They're still trying to get the racist southern vote.
There was a reference to the fact that we had an all-white jury. It's because there were 0 blacks on the voting list. Nobody could sue it. And still, it's less than 5% black voters. They're still controlled economically by whites.
I was glad to see that Willie Reed lived a long life. You know,
Yeah, and you know where Willie Reed was when they found him? He was one of 5 people in a neighboring county jail under an assumed name. It was Medgar Evers and that the guy that had the doctor who had control of the town that found him. And that's how he was brought to the trial. Now, nowadays, you couldn't do that because you can't introduce a witness at the last minute the defense doesn't know about. But they were hiding witnesses under assumed names. That was H.C. Strider. Yeah.
You know, because it's a tremendous courage to stand up.
Absolutely. So the question I have for everybody here is that you've heard this story and it's a nice history lesson, but what does it mean today? So when I was in Chicago at the end of the panel discussion, there was a very interesting question that the moderator posed and said, what are you going to do about it? So you heard all these things. It's history. It's also current. What are you going to do about it? Are you? I mean, certainly we can pray, but it also takes action. And I made the stupid mistake of going up to the executive director of the foundation down in Mississippi, and I introduced myself, and he says, "Oh yeah, I just missed you that day when you were there with your tour guide." And I said, "I got an idea for you." He said, "What's that?" I said, why don't you engage volunteers across the country who will talk regionally in high schools about why the story of Emmett Till is important? Guess who the first volunteer for that program is? Yep. So what are you going to do about it is the question I'm posing, because racism still exists in this country. And, you know, the USCCB, interesting enough, has a mass against racism. And I would think that would be something your committee might want to take up and see if one of the priests want to have a mass on it. Because the more you bring it to people's attention, the better. Now, you may not think it even occurs here, but do any of you remember Brother Dwight? He was a very dynamic, boisterous, flamboyant, brother in the Dominican order. He eventually left the Dominican order, became a priest. He's out in Seattle. And I remember he and I got to be good friends because he was involved in RCA and I was. And he told me a story that I could not believe. He said one day after he preached after at the announcement portion that he went in the gathering space and 3 college students came up to him and said, how long are you going to be here? He said, well, I'm going to be here for the school year. He's still going to preach. Yes. I don't want a nigger preaching in my church. At St. Thomas. We got work there. And I just couldn't believe it either. An institution of higher education. How in this day and age?
That was when Dwight was here.
Yeah, Dwight was probably here 10 years ago, 9 years ago.
Oh, more.
No, I don't think so.
It was a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, can you imagine?
Probably Jackson. Yeah, Tom Jackson. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we would invite you all to the racial equality and justice as we explore issues and learn about racism. So, you know, we have meetings on the first Tuesday of every month. So
there's another action you can take.
Well, we, you know, the greatest revolution is a simple change of heart. So that's what we're trying to do by educating ourselves.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring up it's sort of tangential, but the August 28th, that's no coincidence, I'm sure.
For
the
day of the murder of Martin Luther King.
Well, they're both the same day.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I think it's the genius of Byron Rustin. They put that speech on the date, the anniversary.
Yeah.
Emmett Till's death.
Yeah, and actually that speech was changed the night before because in his speech, he actually was referring to Emmett Till.
Oh,
and
really?
it was told by advisors to take it out.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
It was in the original speech.
There's a PBS.
He thought it was too controversial. He thought it would take away from his message.
There's a PBS movie production coming out about Byron Rustin, which is long overdue.
Yeah. Well, you see in my biography, I've got the different books that I've read and a lot of the videos. I didn't realize I had done that many until I put together the list. They are fascinating, and you've got my different reactions, which ones you want. I have that as a Word document. I can email it to you. There's live links in the email, but they obviously aren't in print. And Zelda has it as well. Been a very attentive audience. I'm sorry it went so long, but I thought it was very useful and interesting. And feel free to look through a bunch of different books. You want to borrow some, don't take the cornstarch. But you're welcome to any of these others if you want to borrow it. If you want to read that one, go right ahead. I wrote it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm gonna stick around if you want to hear other stories, like you want to hear my Charleston story.
That girl.
It's similar to Reverend Parker's story. Yeah. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Really.
Add more books to my pile.
Yeah, right. Right.
I've seen Argo in a plastic container.
Yeah, yeah. And I didn't buy this intentionally for it. I had it before I went. I just had it in my cabinet. I saw it. That'll make a good prop. Thank you. This one.
Is that on this list?
It is. And I have it. You were on it. And she actually gave me another one I actually should put in there, but it didn't directly relate. But Daughters of the Rebel, Daughters of Boycott. It was about the bus boycott in Montgomery, and it's written by the daughters of the people that did it, including the PBS reporter. That was fascinating. Fascinating story.
I work at the library, so I'm gonna see if this is.
At Purdue Library?
No.
West Lafayette
County.
No, Tippecanoe County. Well, make sure they have those books because if they don't, I'll donate them.
write down the one about the daughters of the.
Oh, Daughters of the Revolution,
Daughters of the Boycott.
or Daughters. Yeah. Okay. I did? No.
I know, thanks, thank you.
You're welcome. John, good to see you.
Just a quick follow-up on my question.
Yeah.
I assume she continued to live just kind of a normal life.
Maybe so?
Yeah, no, Carolyn.
Oh, Carolyn Bryant?
Yeah, I mean, just accepted member of society down there.
She divorced her first husband because, believe it or not, he abused her. What a shock, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So she got divorced and then she moved away from the area for a while after he died, and then she moved back. And then she eventually became sick and